All right, we're recording. It's Friday night.
Yeah, it's a little late. Sorry, my bad on that one.
You were getting a little chilled out there, is
I
what
was
you were
getting
doing the last
a
hour.
little chilly. So I'm down in San Diego for a conference, and the San Diego Triathlon Club swims every Friday night in La Jolla at 5:30. And I was like, well, that would be awesome to go do because it's going to be about the same temperature as Sand Hollow next week.
Oh,
And yeah, the sun kind of went down a little bit, and I got pretty cold. I was
yeah,
we barely started podcasting because I was shivering so much.
yeah,
So I'm sitting in my car with the heater on.
yeah.
But I got got an hour in of swimming, and actually it's pretty rough ocean today.
Mm-hmm.
But that was good. Helping get me prepared.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and hypothermia is a real thing, and you can get hypothermic even in, an hour swim. You can get
Yep.
hypothermic in less than that.
Yep.
And it sometimes can take days to get, back to feeling normal. But hopefully you're warm up now
Yeah.
and
It's so crazy, right? Because the difference between even like a half hour swim and an hour swim is significant. Because at a half hour,
yeah,
I was fine.
yeah,
And even thinking about like we were in Oceanside like 5 weeks ago. It's the same
mhm,
temperature. It's like 60
yeah,
degrees. And but we only swam like 35 minutes.
right, right,
And because I felt good tonight until probably 45 minutes in,
mm-hmm,
and then I
mm-hmm,
was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting cold.
yeah,
And I could see how far I still had to go, and I was like, oh man, I just gotta just go, but it gets to a point where you want to go harder because you're cold, so you
mm-hmm,
stay warm. But then the longer you go, the more fatigued you get too,
yeah,
and
right,
so you can't potentially go as hard as you want.
mm-hmm.
So that's good. It's good stuff. Yeah, it's really good stuff.
No, that's good. And so we probably need to do core temperature as a talk sometime, but that's not what we had planned for tonight.
No, tonight we're going to talk about some biking stuff and some biking stuff in the context of a triathlon. Which,
Yeah,
John, it's awesome that we do a triathlon podcast because we get to talk about swim, bike, and run, but ultimately each one affects the other.
yeah,
You know, um, I'm just thinking of next weekend, for example, and I know we're going to talk more next week about next weekend, but if you get hypothermic in that first hour swim, hour and 15-minute swim, and then you got to get on a bike, like how long does it take you to warm up, and how
yeah.
much does it affect you, and do you potentially even overbike in the beginning to warm up, not recognizing that you'll potentially be burning matches, and it is an interesting sport that we're talking about. Obviously, we've done over 100 podcasts, and because I think this, when we could keep doing this forever because there's so many variables.
Yeah, no, there is. And I'm thinking back to just we'll get to the bike part of this, but thinking back to some of the Norseman research that's been done, and Norseman is the swim that is typically 55, less than 60 degrees temperature water, and they've done some research of athletes and looked at core temperature during some different years. And it is, somewhere around 20 to 40 minutes that you start to see that change, if I remember correctly, in core temperature. And so, your anecdote of saying 30 minutes you were fine is probably pretty straight on. And then the core temperature starts to change. And yeah, that's tough because then you get out and you've got to run in bare feet, out of the water, and you're going to be so cold that you won't feel it. Then you're going to get on your bike, and now you are not only just cold, but now you've got the wind factor to deal with, especially in that first part of the race,
Yeah, and you're wet.
and you're wet, and so that's going to influence core temperature even more.
You
Um,
know, and I know once again this is not really the topic of the day, but if you think about it too, like what happens if you get hypothermic
uh,
and then in a race like next weekend, and then later in the day it's 90 degrees.
yeah, that's right. I think you've mentioned that before, and I think that's interesting. Yeah, now your environment is changing so much within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah,
That's going to be that's
because
going
yeah,
to
your thermoregulatory center in your
yeah.
brain is not used to dealing with that.
No, it could go a little haywire, and then if you're out longer than the sun is,
You get
and the
cold
sun's
again.
going to go down, and you're going to have cold temps again, or you're going to be cold again. So I think it's going to be an interesting course. So
Well, and speaking of the course, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about what we're going to talk about is such a hilly bike course.
hmm
It's such an undulating bike course. So we've a long time ago we talked about some of the metrics in Training Peaks,
yeah,
and one of the metrics we talked about was variability index.
yeah,
And this week I read everything I could possibly read on variability index and triathlon.
yeah,
And John, there's not much out there.
yeah. Not research wise, lots
Not
on
research wise.
coaching pages and
There's
stuff. But
tons of anecdotes,
yeah,
right?
right.
And the research, and Vernice got us some papers again, but the research is on Olympic distance.
Yeah, right, right.
And I think that, there's a ton of research on variability index in time trialing.
hmm
But I guess we should define variability index. Do you want to take that?
No, go ahead. I mean,
Okay.
I'll jump in with the
Okay.
normalized power part.
So basically, what it is it's taking the ratio of normalized power to average power.
hmm
So, and seeing how much basically it's the variability between those two numbers.
Right.
So do you want to I think everyone understands what average power is. So in a
Yeah.
race, it's pretty easy. Like this is your average power for that time. And then and we've talked about normalized power before, John, but why don't you go ahead and define that one?
Yeah, and normalized power is an interesting phenomenon. The average is the average, and that's pretty straightforward, mean average value. But normalized power, what we do is we take the power data point, whatever data point we're dealing with, and we raise it to the fourth power. And then we average all those powers over some period of time. And 30 seconds is a typical window that's used, but you average it over time. And then you take that averaged fourth raised power value, and then you take the 1/4 root of that. So you're basically getting back to regular units at that
Yeah,
point.
if it's 1/4 root and you've been to the fourth power, literally, yeah,
Uh,
you're multiplying it and then you're taking it back.
That's right. That's right. And so what that does is it emphasizes bigger numbers more.
Yeah.
And so, it's easier to talk about square values. So root mean square is the same thing. It's a very, standard statistical measure that we take. We square all the data, we average the squared values, and then we take the square root of that. And we call that root mean square, square root mean square. So you're going back to normal values. And so if you think about a number like 2, if you square it, that goes to 4. But then if you take 4, that goes to 8. And 8 squared goes to 64. And so those numbers get bigger faster. And so now if you're averaging 2, 4, 6, 8, that's different than averaging 2, 4, 16. I skipped that. 32. Those numbers are growing exponentially. And so the idea behind that is power is power is a function of velocity squared. And so we know that power is exponentially related to velocity. And in the physiology world, we see a lot of parameters that, oddly enough, are physiologically related to the fourth power of a number. So that's where this normalized power came from for cycling. It's been used in comparative biomechanics type of work. So it's an interesting phenomenon.
So, John, let's just do this. So, what does that all mean? Like for the average triathlete / cyclist, why do we want to know what normalized power is? Like, what does it truly tell us versus what average power
Yeah,
does?
that's a great question. And what normalized power is going to be more related to your physiology than
Okay.
average power. And it's more related to your physiology because the bigger numbers are getting emphasized more. And we know when we're cycling, if you're going 200 watts and then you go 220 watts, that's different than if you're going from 140 watts to 160 watts. Still a 20 watt different, but exponentially, it's harder to go from 200 to 220. And so the normalized power tends to be more related to physiology than mean power.
Right. Most people use it, or at least I've always used it as the true amount of work I've done, or the true
Yeah.
amount of
Yep.
the true amount of my effort. So
Mm-hmm.
if I go out and let me give you an example. When I commute to work, right? So let's say it's an hour commute to work.
Right.
If I just kind of just go with the flow, got some traffic lights in there, got a lot of coasting, my average power might be 120 watts.
Yeah, right.
If I sprint between every light, doesn't make a difference. It's still it'll be 120, 130 watts.
Yeah.
But if I sprint between every light for an hour, that'll be a hard workout.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so by looking at normalized power, my normalized power for that might be 170 watts, 180 watts. And that's more of a true indication of how hard I worked.
No, I like that. Yeah, I like that comparison.
Yeah. So when we think about this in the racing a triathlon, I often think of it like, and I know it's not true, but I often think of it's not counting my zeros.
Right.
It weights the zeros, obviously, because of this 0 times 0 times 0 times 0.
Yeah, right.
It's still 0.
Yeah.
Right. And so it doesn't weight the zeros very much. And so if I'm not pedaling, it doesn't count against me, but physiologically it doesn't count against me either.
Oh, that's right. And going back to one more comparison of average and normalized, because I like this example that you're giving, is and I know you're going to do this, so I'll beat you to it.
Do it.
If you go out and bike at 160 watts consistently for the whole time, then your average power and your normalized power will be exactly the same.
They will be exactly
because there's no change. But so even if you take the fourth order of 160 and then you take the quarter root of that, if all the numbers are 160, the mean and the normalized power will be exactly the same.
So then let's take that to variability index. So that would be a 1.0 variability index. And whereas if you're back to that commute, so let's say I was 170 watts normalized and my average was 120, my variability index might be 1.2.
Yeah, right.
Or some number like that. But it'll be it'll be something like that. Yeah. So when we, not everyone actually looks at this number. It's a number available on Training Peaks. You can get it on your Garmin. You can get it on different places. But why, John, with what you understand, why has this become why is this a number that we care about, or that people have tended to care about?
Well, it starts to tell you how much your power is changing over the course. And now we get into variability of power, and that variability number is just describing how much something changes. In this case, we're talking about power.
Well, John, just briefly, since it's really is in your world of exercise physiology and biomechanics, can you explain variability, I guess? Just what that means?
So, variability would be an example of variability that everyone's probably familiar with is standard deviation. And all that is telling us how much values vary or how different they are over time. And so it just is giving us a sense of a value or description of the change of a number. So if you have 160 watts with no variability, no standard deviation, then every data point is going to be 160 watts. If you've got 160 watts and you start to have some measure of variability, some standard deviation, now what that means is that you have a mean 160 watts, but you're having lots of changes in data points.
Yeah, John, that's a good way to explain that. I think that really does help. Okay, so now go back to sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So now in that example, if you have that change in power, and now if you take the normalized of calculation of that power set that's changing, that number is going to be different than your mean power. And now variability index gives that sense of how much change the data are happening around that mean data point. So I think I'm going in circles now.
Yeah, you're a little bit going in circles, but I think the whole point here is how stochastic is your bike ride. And it can be the same for a run. We can have a variability index for running as well. Like, how many surges are you taking? You know, the way I always, think about this is, okay, every time I go up a hill and I put more power in,
Yeah.
there's more variability in my ride.
Right. Right.
And so, like I said, we read a lot this week, and I honestly, I scoured the internet for stuff, because when I look at coaches' blogs
Yeah.
and coaching stuff and Joe Friel and whoever, everybody says you need to keep your variability index as low as possible for triathlon.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But I look at the research, and it's very, very limited. Okay. So the theory is that by keeping my variability index down, I'm not having a lot of really powerful surges.
Yep.
So I'm not, burning matches, as it were.
That's right. You're not burning the matches, right?
That's the term, right? But I just can't find this in the research.
Yeah, it's an interesting area to look at, because what's tough is the research we're looking for is research on time trials versus cycling races or even ITU races. And I know we've read some ITU papers, and the reason for that is in a Tour de France type of ride, I think the whole goal is to pedal the least.
It is. So the variability index is going to be huge, right?
Yeah. And then have these surges of being able to generate high levels of power to be able to stay with the peloton or watch a break, whatever it is, and then get back in the peloton and, be pulled along, if you will, in that draft. And so the idea is to pedal as little as possible from, just a funny way of thinking about it.
So let me ask you this then. So in triathlon, what is the measure here that we're looking for? In my opinion, the measure is, and what I read is, how well can you run off the bike?
Yeah, right.
Like that's the measure. It's
that's a great
not how
point.
fast you got your bike from A to B, because you could do 200 watts average or whatever, and however you skin that, you're almost going to get to the finish at the same. But what I'm reading and what the experts are saying is, it's going to affect your run.
Yeah, right.
And in the research that we did have, the limited research in the ITU world, it does.
Yeah.
But I'm not an ITU racer that's running a 30-minute 10K.
No, that's right.
Right. And or even let's say a female that's running a 33-minute 10K. Yeah. That's not me.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the race next weekend, right? So we're looking at 5.5, 6 hour bike leg, maybe longer, with I don't know how 7,700 feet of climb, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I'm starting to think about, okay, what should my variability index be? And it's a really tough thing to think about. Like, should I? Let's hypothetically say my ride's going to be 6 hours, and I can do 180 watts for 6 hours.
Okay.
And let's say I held 180 watts the entire time for 6 hours. I actually think I'll be devastated.
Yeah. Devastated mentally or devastated physically?
Both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't know, like just as an age grouper, I think it's really hard to hold a steady power like that.
Yeah.
And for me, and we've talked about this before, for me, I want to get from point A to point B as fast as I can.
That's right.
But here's the thing, you said it in the Tour de France, with the least amount of effort.
Yeah, that's true, because you need to run afterwards.
Right. So when I look at the St. George course, and I know we're going to talk about it next week, but the downhills, I don't want to pedal. I want zeros.
Yeah, right.
I would rather be going 25 miles an hour with 0 watts than going 30 miles an hour at 180 watts. Because I know every minute I'm not pedaling, I'm recovering. The heart rate's going down. I'm going to be able to ingest carbohydrates better at that point. So for me, I think, I tend to think about it maybe a little bit differently than an ITU racer, or even someone on a dead flat course.
Yeah. Well, but see, here's where I think this is where it's such a hard question to answer in terms of what to do, because on the downhills, and we talked a little bit about this before, I'm actually going to be biking. I'm going to be pedaling a bit because I don't want to cramp up going up the snow canyon the second time. And
Oh no,
so
no, I agree with you on that. But here's the thing: is you're not going to be doing 180
no,
watts,
that's right. That's right. But
right?
you are
You're
going
going
to
to be
try to
doing.
recover on that way
You're going to
down.
be trying to
Yeah.
recover. You might be
Yeah.
doing. Because I'm probably the same. Right? I won't pedal for some. I will
Yeah.
pedal. I'm not going to go like 15 minutes of no pedaling.
No, right, right, right.
Right. But and John, the truth of the matter is, I've raced most of my 70.3s like this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where if I get to a certain speed, usually it's like 28-ish miles an hour
Yep.
on a downhill. Why would I pedal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
So I think it's an interesting thing when I read all the variability index stuff. It's talking about making sure you don't blow up on the climbs,
Yeah.
right? So don't pedal too hard, or your variability index will go off.
Mm-hmm.
But my thought is, I need to find the points where I don't have to pedal, so I can actually save myself for the run.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, because, and again, this is why this research is hard, because now you've got to measure things during the bike, and then also, but really look at the run, and truly you got to look at all three to be able to really understand what's going on. But look, on the variability index for a course like St. George, we know that's going to be higher than a course like Florida,
Yep.
or even Arizona. Although Arizona has some good steady climbs, but that's just it. It's going to be steady. But when you start having these surges of getting up some grades, it's going to cost some power, and then you got to recover. But like you, we talked at one point. The stories often are, well, go easy on the uphills, and then and try to maintain that level power. And I just don't think that's not going to be possible at a course like St. George.
Yeah, well, it is possible, but your gearing would have to be,
Yeah.
32, 32, right?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you want to go up that steepest part of these climbs, maintaining your whatever wattage you're going to
Yeah.
maintain, you're just going to have that exact gearing, and I don't have 32, 32.
No, I don't either. And
So you're going to have to be somewhat stochastic on those climbs.
hmm well, then there's also the issue, and it's interesting. The papers we read didn't really speak too much of this. Is when you get up out of the saddle,
Yeah.
your power that you're looking at while you're out of the saddle is actually telling you something different than the power when you're in the saddle.
Yeah.
And in the saddle, your power is probably closer to predicting your physiology. Out of the saddle, it's a little different, because now what your power represents how fast we transform energy from one form to another. In the sitting in the saddle, the idea is that we're transforming chemical energy, our glucose fats, into mechanical power, and that's what power is telling us. And that's the idea. But when you start standing up out of the saddle, now you're changing potential energy to mechanical energy, or to kinetic energy,
Yeah.
which is going to be power. And so in some sense, that once you're out of the saddle, that number doesn't mean the same as when you're in the saddle.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then we've talked about before that you and I both like to stand.
Yeah, that's right.
And particular on long course for me, like I like to stand because it just gives me that little change of position, and it
Hmm.
actually changes the muscle angles.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I know when I stand, for example, and I've read some research on this. You use your vastus medialis oblique more than your
yeah.
vastus lateralis, which tends to be more overworked when you're
Hmm.
in the time trial position.
Hmm.
So once again, I know I've got to get to a run, and I want my quadriceps to be as fresh as I can.
Right.
So I want to have a little bit of variability in the musculature that I'm using.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's the same stuff in the biomechanics of your hip extensors also.
Hmm.
Your gluteus maximus versus your hamstring, as far as hip extension, it changes when you stand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I might be putting out 20 or 30% more watts when I'm standing, but it's coming from different energy source
Right,
potentially, and also
right.
a different biomechanic source.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. And so, yeah, so now that's variability of which muscles are being used. And I think that's a smart way to think about it, especially on a course like St. George.
Yeah. Well, if we look back to, when they did Challenge Daytona, the pros did it,
Hmm.
and they were all talking about how difficult it was to hold aero
Yeah,
for 2 hours.
yeah, all right.
I think it was a 2 hour bike. Or just, I was thinking, well, actually, it was like an hour 50, I think, for the men.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about that, they were being asked in that course to basically hold a variability index of probably 1.0
Yeah, right.
because it was round and around on a track. And they
Mm-hmm.
all said how difficult it was
Mm-hmm.
to not actually be able to coast and to
Yeah,
not
yeah,
set up. And so then that goes back to like, is having a 1.0 variability index really what we're looking for?
yeah, right.
So,
Well, okay, so now that just made me think of the one of the papers that we read where they looked at variability of power indoors versus variability of power outdoors. I like that paper. That was
yeah.
good.
So this is purely a cycling paper.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. Why don't you want to go ahead and talk about that one?
Yeah, so they had subjects come in, and they were pretty fit subjects, but they had them do a 20-minute ride on a bike ergometer, an indoor trainer, and then they did a 20-minute time trial outside at a fixed 1.5 kilometer course, something
Yep.
like that. And they let, people pick their own power, and the whole idea was to go as far as you can in that 20 minutes. And interestingly, they measured the power, and on the indoor trainer, the power was somewhat consistent throughout the entire 20 minutes. But for the outdoor ride, there was a lot more variability. And it was partly because of the way the course was designed. Although it was flat, it just had some turns. And so people were probably trying to accelerate out of the turns or slow down going into the turns or what have you. So,
Well, I'll take that back to you. So you've done this. I've done it. Is a 5 hour ride on the trainer harder or easier than a 5 hour ride outside?
They're not the same, that's for sure.
You
But
definitely are.
that's exactly why I count time on the trainer. I I consider that to be a longer ride than the same equivalent time outside.
Yeah, I think it's like a 1.2,
Yeah,
1.3 times.
yeah,
Now, not for the short rides. Like if I
hmm,
go 40 minutes, there's probably not much
yeah,
difference.
yeah,
But when you start going long, and it's something we actually haven't talked about much, but the longer you go, exponentially harder your ride gets.
hmm, hmm,
Not exponentially. Sorry, there's some factor there, right?
right,
So like even outdoors, a three
hmm,
hour if you're riding 5 hours, between
hmm,
hour 3 and 4 is harder than between hour 1 and 2.
right,
Between hour 4 to 5 is harder than, once again, between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3.
hmm,
And it's something that we don't always take into account. We're like, oh well, it's a 5 hour ride, it's just 5 1 hour rides. It's
yeah,
not.
right,
It's on your system. It's a lot more difficult. And then if you add into this where you don't have a lot of variability because you're on a
hmm,
trainer and it's just consistent resistance the entire time,
yeah.
I think it's definitely it's significantly harder, even though you might have a variability index that's way lower.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And this is why it's interesting to see these, the smart trainer development and also the different platforms like Zwift and Ruby. And I think Wahoo's getting into it now too.
Yes,
Um,
and Zwift is coming out with their own smart trainer too.
oh, really? Oh, nice. And so in that sense, they introduce variability during your indoor ride by having a change in course, and
Yep.
they change the resistance of the trainer. And that seems to make a lot of sense. So the paper we read, I don't remember which year that was. I'll look it up. But it is interesting if we did that type of work on a Zwift course or Ruby course, and then compare the power to the actual course. I think that would be outside. I think that'd
Yeah.
be pretty neat.
I actually think it's one of, it's interesting you bring that up because so many people are into like using erg mode on
Hmm.
the trainer where it controls the power,
Right.
right? And I contend to go for this. If you want to kill yourself, set yourself at about 75-80% of your FTP and say I'm going to go 4 hours in
Yeah.
erg mode.
Right. Right.
It'll destroy you.
You're gonna build up a little
Right?
sweat on that.
And to think about that, that's a variability index of 1.0.
Yeah. Right.
right? So once again, I think we need to be careful when we listen to the gurus about variability index.
Yeah.
But the one piece, and we haven't talked about yet, that actually I do really think is important is the burning of matches, right? And so let's just talk. I'll just talk briefly about burning of matches.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's heard this term of like you only have so many times you can go deep or go hard, and we can, in some of my reading, I actually came up with this, that basically it comes up to the point where when you start going above your threshold, so your FTP, whatever we want to use,
whatever you want to call it. Yep.
So many different ones. But when you start going above that, that's when you actually start utilizing more glycogen, causing potentially more muscle fatigue, and that actually is exponential. The further you go above your threshold, the more you're utilizing.
Yep.
And so I agree with the same coaches as far as keeping your variability index down, to not go above your FTP, and if you do, for a very short amount of time. Right. So for example, on the Snow Canyon course, when it's a 70.3 on that last mile, that's probably the only time in the whole course I'll go above my FTP.
Yeah, right. Oh, right? You think so? Yeah.
Yep. Where, let's say my FTP this fall, it was 280 watts.
Right.
That time, like I don't think I went over 280 watts any other time in that whole course except for that last mile, when I went to 300 for that last mile.
Right.
Well, so I burned some matches there, but I knew I was doing it and I planned it. What I didn't do was every time the course went up a little bit, it had a little incline, I didn't go to 300 watts every time. And so I was protective of keeping myself below my FTP.
Yeah.
And there is variability there in that FTP number. So let's say I'm going to average 220 watts for, let's make it easy, 200 watts for the race. Yeah, I'll go up to 220, 230, 240 on some climbs, but I'm not going to go into that 300 range.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is the important part, more so than variability index, is knowing your FTP and understanding what happens when you go over it or when you get close to it.
Yeah, you're right, because you can only do that so many times. And there's a lot of research built on this model, which it really, what you're describing and what I'm linking to my brain right now is this experiment where you do an hour ride. And then what they do in the experiment is every 10 minutes that you do an all-out 30-second bike, effort. And the idea is to then look at the power output during that 30-second effort. And what happens over an hour, it goes down generally. Oddly enough, sometimes at the end it comes back up.
That's the mental side.
Yeah, that introduces another discussion. But that's what is happening is that 30-second effort keeps going down and down and down, over the course of a long endurance ride, because of this antidote concept of burning matches. You burned a match, you burned a match, you burned a match, and you have less matches to burn. I guess that doesn't work all the way through, but the book of matches, there's only so many matches in that book, and eventually you're going to reduce that power throughout that endurance ride. And if you burn them all, then you're not going to be happy at the end.
Well, I think it's part of, like, burning matches is a good anecdote, and obviously I've said it several times, but I think you can think of it like a gas tank too, right? Is if you're driving your car and every half hour you put the hammer down all the way and you go 120 miles an hour, you burn gas way quicker.
But now you're going to get yourself in trouble, because because with the electric vehicles,
okay,
you can have even hybrid.
I'm going to have range anxiety.
Yeah, right. Because you can increase the range of your car by changing your speedometer, and so you should be pushing on your gas pedal, coming off, pushing.
On an electric car, you're right. But in a traditional gas-powered car, and we have to think about that, because we talked about it before, but glycogen is a finite resource. Yeah. Right. And so if every time you do that, you start burning more glycogen or utilizing more glycogen as the primary fuel source, you've only got so much of it. And
That's
I
right.
think
And you've got the glycogen in the muscle, you've got the glycogen in the blood, and the glycogen in the liver. And yeah, and that you're also taking in glycogen, the gels and what have you. But there's only so much you can get in as well. If you're burning it too quickly, you're going to run out. And a lot of things depend on glycogen, glucose to be able to continue to contract muscles.
so. It's interesting because some people in their training, and I've been known to prescribe training like this, will actually put in like every 40 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 minute sprint into
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah,
with the idea of burning and using glycogen,
yeah.
right?
Right.
Because I want to, in that third, fourth hour of my ride,
Mm-hmm.
to be glycogen depleted,
Yeah,
but to do it on purpose, so then you theoretically become a better metabolizer of free fatty acids,
yeah. Right.
right? So if you think about it, that's the reason I'm doing that. I don't necessarily want to do that and then have to run a half marathon
Yeah, right.
or a full marathon after. I want to have as much glycogen in my tank as possible.
Yeah, and you don't want to be doing that in the last section of your iron distance event or 70.3.
Yep,
Because you
exactly.
do, like you said, you do want to recover, and that's the whole idea of going downhill and pedaling lightly or not at all is letting the body get back to homeostasis and let everything get back to normal.
Yeah, yeah, and don't forget, it's not just your leg muscles; it's your heart too, right? Your
Oh, your
heart
heart and your brain.
and your brain, they're taking up energy like crazy.
Yeah.
And if I can take it easy for 15 minutes or
Mhm.
10 minutes even, um, that's going to be a good thing to allow my,
Yeah.
just to once again utilize less fuel. And
Well,
and
and
and fuel's the name of the game here.
yeah, no, exactly. And this is why the St. George course is going to be super interesting and thinking about what you're dealing with right now with your hypothermic situation, your hypothermic swim in San Diego. So you're going to get out of the water in Sand Hollow. You're already going to be cold, which means your body's going to try to warm up. That is burning glucose to be able to contract muscle, make it, if you start shivering, that's the whole idea is you're trying to generate heat. That's what your body's doing.
Yep.
Well, now you exit and you're already probably, metabolically higher than you normally would be in a, if you're not hypothermic. Now you're going to go up that first hill and you can't burn your matches then because that's, within the first, uh,
For
you know,
5 miles.
yeah, first 5 miles, right? Or do
Well, actually,
we
this
go,
one we're actually going to
we
get
go right first and
now.
then
We're
we
going to
come
get a
back.
downhill,
Yeah,
which
yeah, right. We get the
which when you're
downhill
cold is going
first.
to be
That's
even
right.
worse.
Right, right. Yeah. Let me look at the bike wise. Yeah, we
Because
go
you take that
downhill,
hill
then we
right.
come back up, and then we go uphill, and then we go uphill again. And
So
then
yes, so I think you're spot on with this, John. It's like knowing the course,
yeah.
knowing your fuel status,
Hmm.
knowing how much fuel you're going to potentially burn or utilize by going a little bit too hard,
Yeah.
and recognizing that. And here's the thing: is once you've done it too much, there's almost no coming back.
Yeah, right.
Like the only way to come back is to literally stop pedaling
Hmm.
and eat,
Yeah, right.
right? Or on the run, you're going to be walking and eating,
Hmm. Hmm.
and even then, it's really hard to make
Hmm.
that back up.
Yeah. No, that's true. And so, especially St. George course, I mean, the phrase I'm going to just have in my head is "Don't be a hero." Don't let that variability index go haywire because it's going to be hard to recover from.
Yeah, yeah. But once again, I still contend that your variability index is going to be still pretty bad
Hmm.
because of the zeros,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Well, but it also depends on how you've set up your cycling computer to include zeros or not
That's
include
true.
zeros. So then there's a
Yeah.
little trick there. But this is a good way to evaluate, types of courses that suit your style or your fitness level. And I know, a course that is no hills is not good for me. A
Oh, me
course
neither.
with long, long hills, even like St. George, that's not good for me. I enjoy very much that punchy rolling hill type of course where I don't know that seems to suit my style and my physiology pretty well.
But I would say that St. George is more of the punchy.
Yeah.
I don't think,
Hmm.
because really, is there any truly long climbs? Even even you go up the back of gun stock, it's
Hmm.
only steep for 5 minutes,
Yeah, right, right.
right? And Snow Canyon, it's like the last 2 miles is the only part that's
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
steep.
Hmm.
So I think that, John, I think that you're actually going to surprise yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like when we raced in Austria and we had that 45-minute climb.
Yeah, yeah,
Like that was a long climb.
yeah, right, right.
So no, I think that you're right though, and this is the fun part to me of triathlon is
Hmm.
not worrying about these things. It's
No, right.
planning for these things.
But planning for them.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
planning so you're ready for at least you have a plan. And we've talked about this before. Everyone's got a good plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah, right.
But still, at least having a plan and accepting that you're not going to be the hero,
Yeah,
passing 50 people going up the first climb.
yeah, right, right. If you're
Right?
doing
That,
that, you're,
if you're passing 50 people going up the first climb, you're doing something wrong in this
yeah,
in
no
this game,
matter what wave you're starting in,
no
you're,
matter what wave you're starting in.
yeah.
Whereas when we go out there and we race in the sprint races, the
Hmm.
BBSC sprint races, heck yeah, I'm going to pass as many people as I can because I'm not trying to save anything.
Yeah, right.
So I think you're right. Is that this is the kind of thing that a good triathlete should be doing, and I think you made a good point. It's also based off of you and
Yeah.
what you've done and your physiology and your training
Mm-hmm.
status. Both of us have had a kind of a rough build into this race,
Mm-hmm.
and so our training status is also playing a role,
Right.
right? If my build would have been the way I wanted, I would be thinking about this a little bit differently.
Yeah, right.
Same with you, right?
Mm-hmm. Throw
And
caution
so
to the wind at that point.
and so I think that being honest with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
as far as how hard you're going to go up a climb or how easy you're going to go down a climb, what your sustained power is going to be, and then remember we talked about this before. You are what you are. You
Yeah,
are what you've
right.
trained,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's never your day.
No, no, this is where we're deviate here. You gotta let the magic happen.
Not in the first two hills.
All right, not then. No,
John, you let the magic happen at mile 20 on the run.
you're going to pay the price. Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. I like that. 20 mile, 20 in the run. Okay, let the magic happen.
Yep. If you get to mile 20 in the run and you're like, dang, I can run this last 10K. I'm gonna make this last 10K. That's gonna be my best 10K of the day.
Yeah,
I'm feeling great. Be a hero in that
yeah.
last 10K.
Well, okay, so to a whole bunch of people are doing Rage tomorrow,
Yep.
our local race,
Oh yeah, let's
and
talk about that.
that's a race that you can be the hero on, and you can let it go. And sprint race,
Especially the
Olympic
sprint race.
distance. Yeah.
I think in that Olympic distance, I think that depends on you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know some people that this is gonna be their first Olympic distance race.
Yeah. Right.
And in that case, don't be the hero, right? Like
No,
respect that course because that course on
it's
the bike can be brutal.
that course is any of our courses down there at Boulder Beach Lake Mead. They're tough, and there's no flat. It's a tough course.
What's the wind supposed to be like tomorrow?
Tomorrow is not bad. Sunday is bad.
Okay, good. Well, that makes it better too because that course in the wind is brutal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that'll mess up your variability index too. By the way,
it
is
will.
especially on an out and back course. If you get
Hmm.
yourself a big tailwind one way and a big
Hmm.
headwind the other way, you're not going to be able to maintain. Well, you shouldn't maintain a tight variability index. It's not. I don't think that's smart racing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, John, that was awesome. I think we covered a lot of ground
Yeah.
in a short amount of time. There's anything else you wanted to add? Anything else from the papers that you found?
Are you warmed up?
I am. I'm actually starting to sweat a little bit.
That's-
I had to turn the heat down in my car.
I love it.
I
No,
couldn't.
that was
Honestly, it's
good.
funny. I was like, I don't even know if I could talk.
There's what?
I didn't even know if I'd be able to talk tonight.
Yeah, that's right. I remember my hypothermic story when we swam in Lake George in June for a lifeguard class, no wetsuit, and it took us like a week to warm up. We were just constantly shivering, and your jaw just gets tired from the shivering and clenching. So yeah,
I tried to be a hero tonight. There's like different spots where the group would turn around,
yeah,
and so they call it the half point, the 3/4 point, or the full. And
okay,
at the 3/4 point, pretty much everyone was going to go back. And so one
Uh,
guy is like, hey, I'm gonna go to the full. Anyone want to go? I'm like, I'll go.
Yeah, there you go.
Try to be the hero.
And you paid the price.
Paid the price. But I kept telling myself, this is what I'm gonna deal with next week. So
That's right.
better to have an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like the guy that was like, hey, let's go, and he's not wearing a wetsuit.
Oh, I love it. No, that's guts. That's great.
But I guess when you come out here and you swim it like 2-3 times a week, you develop that that brown fat. Your hypothalamus changes.
Yeah, there is some adaptation that you can have, and you can become cold adapted.
Yeah. The tricky thing here is, how do I do my heat training for St. George and my cold adaptation at the same time?
Right. I know.
I can't find any literature on that either, by the way.
No, that's that temperature swing is going to be interesting. I have looked at the temperature a little bit. It may be high 80s, but it actually dropped down. The prediction just came down to mid to low 80s for a high. So we'll see.
But still, that's a huge swing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right from the morning to. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be wearing my core temperature monitor.
Oh, cool.
I'm really excited to see what happens throughout the day, and because it's been really when I've worn it, it's been very cool to see, especially when you do a climb and you see your core temperature go up. If you get a tailwind, in the fall when we raced, or was it spring? In the spring St. George race, we had a tailwind going up Snow Canyon.
Okay.
And my core temperature went way up.
No,
I was going a little harder on that climb.
Yeah.
But when you get a tailwind on a climb, it's amazing, how quickly your core temperature can go up. So that'll be cool. So, John, what do you got planned for this weekend, for your last weekend for your Ironman?
I put my race wheels on, so I'll go out for a little ride, make sure my tires and my tube are all good. I'll do a short run. I've not done, longest ride I've done is Oceanside, and that was 4 or 5 weeks ago.
4 weeks ago, yeah.
So this has been, this will be the least training I've done for an iron distance event, and so it's going to be interesting to see how this goes, because I'm totally changing my approach with how to do it, and it is going to be Tour de St. George. That's the mentality I'm going to have. So.
And then next week we're going to go live from St. George.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Thursday night, we'll do a special Thursday night.
Yeah, that's probably good.
Since we got to be at the shuttle buses at like 4 a.m. on. Do you see that ridiculousness?
Not everybody has to hit that shuttle bus.
Oh.
But the special needs bag are supposed to be dropped where you get the shuttle bus that morning. So I may not have a special needs bag.
Well, why don't you just have a friend like me drop off your special needs bag? I was actually thinking about it, like, where the Walmart is?
Yeah.
I can just walk from there. I might get there just as fast.
Yeah, right, with sleeping in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're actually, if anyone's listening and they have a Razor 4-wheeler.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Lend me one for the weekend. Actually, I'll rent one from them for the weekend, so I can just ride my Razor up there
in the desert. Yeah.
In the desert, yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea.
We're actually going to try and rent one. Believe it or not, we're gonna.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
When we get there, so.
Oh.
But yeah, so everybody, next Thursday night, live from the World Championship.
Yep, that'll be great.
Yep, awesome.
Okay.
All right, John. Well, that was a great talk. Thanks.
All right, talk soon.
Okay, bye.